All right, today we're going to jump right into Pakistan's latest monthly trade report. Think of these numbers as the country's economic pulse. We get to see exactly what it's selling, what it's buying, and most importantly, the balance between the two. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the big picture, that widening trade gap. Then, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of exports, the good and the bad. After that, we'll look at what's driving up the national import bill. We'll zoom out to see the key partners and products. And finally, we'll nail down the bottom line for you.
Okay, first up, let's tackle the headline story. This is all about the growing gap between what Pakistan is earning from the rest of the world and what it's spending.
And wow, we're starting with a big one. Over the first 5 months of the fiscal year, the trade deficit for goods, we're talking physical products here, has ballooned by over 37%. That is a really significant jump compared to last year. And this slide right here shows you exactly why that's happening. If we just look at November, exports are down, a pretty hefty 15%. At the exact same time, imports are up by over 5%. It's like a classic pincer movement squeezing the trade balance from both sides. But, and this is where things get really interesting, while the trade in physical stuff is struggling, there's a whole other part of the economy that's telling a completely different story. And bam, here it is. Exports in the services sector, things like IT, consulting, finance, they aren't just growing, they are showing some seriously robust growth. We're talking up nearly 18% in November alone. This is a huge positive that's helping to offset some of the bad news on the goods side. All right, let's peel back the layers on those export numbers. We need to see which sectors are winning and which are really facing some headwinds. So, if you look at where Pakistan's goods are going, this table tells a pretty clear story. For the top 3 partners, the US, China, and the UK, exports were down across the board in November. Not a great sign from your biggest customers. But then you see this number, and it just pops right off the page. Amid all those declines, exports to Tanzania just skyrocketed by an incredible 346%. Now, of course, it's a smaller market, but it really shows there's huge potential for growth if you look at some non-traditional partners. When you break it down by sector, you can see where the real pain point is. The massive textile and leather sector saw a dip, but a relatively small one at 3%. But look at agro and food, a massive 41% drop in just 1 month. Ouch. And when you zoom in on specific products, you really see this split personality. On one hand, you've got staples like rice and oilseeds taking a huge hit. But on the other hand, things like women's apparel and industrial products like ethyl alcohol, they're absolutely booming. It's a real mixed bag. All right, so we've talked about what's going out. Now let's flip the coin and look at what's coming in. What's behind that rising national bill? So what exactly is Pakistan spending more money on? Well, the November data points to a few key and pretty different categories. Okay, first up, get ready for this. A 213% jump in motor car imports. I mean, that is just a staggering number, and it points to some really strong demand for high-value consumer goods. And it's not just consumer goods. Look at this. Agricultural imports like soybeans are up by almost 90%. That highlights a pretty big reliance on other countries for key things needed for animal feed and oil production. And to round it out, a staple in pretty much every kitchen, palm oil is up 50%. That's a huge increase that directly hits the national food bill and, ultimately, people's wallets. Okay, let's pull back a bit. We've been looking at just November, so what does the bigger picture look like over the last 5 months? Who are the key partners and what are the key products? When you look at where the imports are coming from, one region really stands out: Asia. Over that 5-month stretch, imports from top partners like China, the UAE, and Indonesia all shot up by around 30% or even more. And on the export side, this longer view pretty much confirms what we already suspected from the November data. You've got these areas of incredible strength, like women's apparel and petroleum oils. But that massive, almost 50% drop in rice exports over the same period is just a major drag on the whole picture. All right, we've gone through a ton of numbers. So what's the big takeaway here? After digging through all of this, what's the bottom line? It really boils down to 3 key things. First off, the trade gap for physical goods is getting worse, and that's putting real pressure on the economy. Second, it's a double whammy. Key exports like food are struggling, while the cost of bringing in essentials and consumer goods is going up. And third, let's not forget the bright spot.
the services sector is showing serious growth and real strength. When you put all of this together, it really leads to one big, crucial question about the path forward. Because at the end of the day, a single month's report isn't just about numbers. It's a snapshot that forces a much bigger question about the country's entire economic strategy. The real challenge isn't just managing deficits month to month. It's figuring out how to turn the tide for the long run.